please like, subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow since not many people watch these all the way through. I hadn't seen Monica in over a year when the invitation came. A formal-looking digital card landed in my inbox with a gold border and cursive writing that read, "Join us for an intimate celebration of gratitude and connection." It was signed, "With love, Monica and Rick." At first I thought it was a mistake. It didn't mention a birthday, an anniversary or any particular occasion. Just a dinner at Solari, one of the priciest restaurants in Scottsdale. I stared at it for a while, unsure if I should laugh or feel honored. Monica and I were never what you'd call close. We didn't grow up hating each other, but from the moment we became old enough to understand the world, Monica started building hers without me in it. She was always the golden one, valedictorian, homecoming queen, Ivy League grad. I was the kid with scraped knees who got a full ride to a state school and worked weekends at a rehab clinic. So I thought maybe things were different now. People change in their 30s, right? I texted her after I got the invite. Just something short. "Hey, thanks for the invitation. Should I bring anything?" She replied 3 hours later. "Just yourself. Dress upscale cocktail. Can't wait to see you." That was it. No smiley face. No, "I've missed you." But I still booked a flight and asked my supervisor for the weekend off. I tried to tell myself it would be good. Maybe she wanted to reconnect. I landed in Phoenix on a Friday afternoon and rented a black Nissan Sentra that smelled faintly like stale gum. Scottsdale was its usual overpolished self. Everything beige, shiny, expensive. The kind of place where even the grocery store has valet. Monica's directions were precise. "Meet us at Solari at 7:15 sharp. Valet only. Private room in the back." I arrived at exactly 7:13. The valet took my keys like he was handling a Ferrari and handed me a sleek black ticket. Inside, the restaurant was dim and humming with the low, elegant murmur of people who know how much their shoes cost. A hostess in a form-fitting black dress greeted me, checked Monica's name and motioned for me to follow. She led me past the main dining area into a glass-walled room at the back. That's when I saw Monica. She was glowing. That's the only word for it. Her blonde hair was styled in effortless waves, and she wore a navy silk dress that clung to her just enough to say wealth, without screaming it. Rick stood beside her in a tailored gray suit, laughing with another couple that looked like they stepped out of a magazine. There were already 8 people there, all sipping wine, all dressed in shades of bone, slate or champagne. I suddenly felt very Kansas City in my emerald green dress. Monica saw me and smiled, but not like you smile when you see your sister. It was tight, performative. Her arms didn't open for a hug. Instead, she gestured with her champagne flute and said, "You made it. Everyone, this is my little sister Haley." Heads turned, polite smiles flickered. I gave a small wave. Monica added quickly, "She's a physical therapist. Works with injured athletes and like people recovering from surgeries. Isn't that noble?" There was a ripple of amusement around the room. I couldn't tell if they were laughing at me or at her idea of noble. Then she turned back to her friends and didn't offer me a seat. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. There were 8 high-backed chairs arranged in a perfect oval around a gleaming table. All taken. Then I noticed a small bistro table set up in the corner. It had 1 chair, 1 glass, 1 napkin. Before I could say anything, the hostess tapped my arm gently and whispered, "Right this way." She led me to the corner like it had all been arranged beforehand. I sat down slowly, heat crawling up my neck. My table was technically in the same room, but positioned just enough behind a wine rack that I couldn't see most of the group unless I leaned out. No one looked over. No one said anything else to me. Dinner started. Servers flowed in and out with plates of foie gras Wagyu beef tartare, and heirloom squash soup poured at the table. Each course was announced with flourish at the main table. My corner got the same dishes but silently without ceremony. At one point Monica toasted, "To found families and people who lift us higher." She didn't glance my way. The guests clinked glasses. I drank my wine alone. I thought about leaving midway through, but I didn't want to make a scene. So I sat there eating each bite carefully, chewing like it was normal to be the only person seated like a leper at my sister's celebration of connection. The only interaction I had was when Rick passed by me on his way to the restroom. He paused, smiled awkwardly and said, "Hey Haley. You good?" I nodded. He kept walking. Dessert was some kind of deconstructed milfy. Monica posed for a picture with the waiter holding the tray. Still no eye contact. When the evening wrapped up, I stood outside waiting for my car. Monica came out with the group, laughing loudly, looping her arm through one of her friends. I waited for her to say something. She didn't. My car pulled up. I got in. She didn't wave. Back at the hotel, I took off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed. My feet hurt, but not as much as my pride. I stared at the room service menu for a long time before closing it. I wasn't hungry anymore. I never replied to her follow-up text 2 days later. So great seeing you. Hope you had fun. Growing up with Monica was like living in someone else's spotlight while being expected to applaud. From the moment she could form sentences, she had the kind of magnetism that made adults fawn over her and kids want to be near her. She was beautiful in the kind of way that got her cast as the lead angel in every Christmas play without auditions. And by the time we were in middle school, our teachers had already started saying things like, "She's going places." I heard it so often I started to believe I wasn't. I was the quiet one, the one who got straight A's without being noticed, the one who didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then always carefully. Monica would barge into a room and make it hers. I'd step in after and look for the corners. She could charm anyone. Teachers, coaches, neighbors, our grandparents. With that loud laugh of hers and her perfect posture. I once got grounded for spilling grape juice on her homecoming dress, even though it was her who knocked the glass over while spinning through the kitchen pretending to accept a Grammy. Our parents didn't even try to hide their favoritism. Monica's report cards were displayed on the fridge like artwork. Mine were stacked in a drawer with the junk mail. When she got accepted into Brown, they threw her a graduation party with 80 guests and a catered sushi bar. When I got into Mizzou on a full scholarship, we had Chinese takeout in the living room. I remember my mom saying, "We're just not party people, Haley," even though she'd hired a string quartet for Monica's Sweet 16. The pattern never broke. It just matured along with us. Monica got married in a designer dress that had its own hashtag. I wasn't in the bridal party. She said she wanted a very curated aesthetic, and my figure didn't fit the dress code. I wore navy and sat 3 rows back, watching her pose for a drone camera above the vineyard where they said their vows. I flew home the next morning. She didn't ask if I'd enjoyed myself. Over the years, Monica became something of a social media darling, posting curated glimpses of her serene life, with Rick morning yoga, rose brunches, sunset walks through gated communities. I watched from afar, liking a few posts here and there, usually out of habit. She never commented on mine, never messaged, never called. The only times I ever heard from her were for holidays and big events. Always last minute, always via text, always with the same formal tone. "Hope you're doing well. Just wanted to let you know we're hosting a little get-together this weekend." No pressure. And still part of me kept showing up. Because a small, stubborn corner of me always hoped maybe this time would be different. Maybe she'd pull me aside, hug me too tightly and say she missed me. She never did. Then something shifted. It started subtly. A few more emojis in her texts, the occasional heart on my Instagram post. I got a Christmas card with her handwriting inside instead of the pre-printed Hallmark script she usually relied on. At first, I thought she was just getting older, mellowing out maybe. Or maybe someone had reminded her that family matters. I didn't think too deeply about it until she called me one random Thursday afternoon while I was between patients. My phone buzzed with "Monica," and I stared at it for a full 5 seconds before answering. Her voice was softer than usual. Still bright but careful. She asked how I was, what work had been like, how the weather was in Kansas City. I answered every question cautiously, half waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then she said, "Rick's business is going through a bit of a rough patch. Nothing serious, just some liquidity stuff. You know how the markets are." I didn't. But I nodded anyway, phone pressed to my cheek, listening. That's when I realized. This wasn't warmth. It was convenience dressed in concern. In the following weeks she began texting more. Asking me to catch up, or talk soon. She even sent me a picture of us from 1999, sitting on the hood of Dad's old Jeep with popsicles melting down our wrists. The caption read, "Miss this. Miss you." But I couldn't remember a single moment from that day that felt like a shared memory. For me, childhood had been a quiet waiting room while Monica lived out her spotlight fantasy. The calls kept coming. Once she asked if I knew any good physical therapists in Scottsdale because her friend's son had a knee injury. Another time she wondered aloud if Rick's startup could collaborate with some of the sports clinics I worked with. The subtext was never clear, but the pattern was, every moment of closeness was tied to something she wanted. Information. A connection. A name. I couldn't help but replay that dinner at Solari in my mind. The carefully staged cruelty of it. The table in the corner. The look in her eyes that wasn't cruelty so much as indifference. Like I was a seat filler she could dismiss. And now here she was, talking like we were soul-bound sisters, like distance had only ever been geography, not years of careful exclusion. One night she called while I was folding laundry and asked if I'd considered visiting Arizona again soon. I told her I was busy with work, which wasn't a lie. She said she understood, but her tone shifted. Less cheerful. A bit sharper. She said, "It's just we're trying to surround ourselves with people who really matter right now. You're important, Haley. You always have been." I sat on the edge of my bed with a balled-up sock in one hand and stared at the floor. The thing was, if she'd said those words a few years ago, I might have cried from happiness. But now they sounded like a sales pitch she was trying to close. I didn't know exactly what kind of trouble she and Rick were in, but I knew Monica. If she was suddenly reaching out, suddenly remembering our bond, it wasn't love. It was strategy. And I was just a pawn she hadn't moved in a while. The first time Monica asked me for money, it was framed like the smallest, most casual of favors. She called me while I was walking home from the clinic one rainy Tuesday evening in February, her voice slightly breathless, like she'd been crying or maybe just rehearsing how to sound like she had. She said there had been a sudden issue with their AC unit, and they needed to cover a service call and a part replacement that Rick's business account couldn't stretch to just then. "It's just $400, she said, followed quickly by, "We'll pay you back in a few days, I promise. We're just in a weird cash flow window." The phrasing stuck with me, cash flow window. Like she was running a corporation, not living in a house where she hosted rose tastings and curated dinner parties. I didn't even hesitate, not really. I told her I'd Venmo her the money that night, and I did. She sent me a string of heart emojis after, then added, "You're seriously the best sister ever. I'll make this up to you." At the time I believed she meant it. Over the next few months, the requests became more frequent, but always couched in some sense of urgency, some vague emergency that I couldn't quite verify but didn't feel right questioning either. Once it was $600 because their car, Rick's Tesla, needed unexpected service, and the warranty wouldn't cover it. Another time she needed $900 to hold a payment on a retreat she was organizing for her wellness group, which she swore would pay her back double once it went through. By the end of 7 months, the total had grown to $4,290. I had it all logged, even though I didn't realize I was keeping a record at first. The Venmo notes were all saved. Screenshots of texts. Voice messages where she sounded like she was moments away from some devastating collapse. I wouldn't ask if we had any other options. "Rick is mortified. This is just temporary. You're saving us, Haley. Honestly, I don't know what we'd do without you." I didn't press her, didn't demand a timeline for repayment, mostly because part of me felt embarrassed even asking. As if simply keeping a tally made me petty. I told myself that family helped family, that it was just a hard season she was going through, that money could be recouped but broken trust couldn't. But there was something hollow about it all, something performative. She always sounded so grateful, so touched, but it was the kind of gratitude that vanished the moment the transfer went through. I never got check-ins. Never a random, "How are you doing" message. It was always about her, always tied to a request or a near crisis. There was no interest in me, in my work, in my life. Just the convenience of me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that every time she'd thanked me, it had been a line from a script. The same wording over and over: "You're saving us. You're amazing. We'll figure this out soon." And soon never came. After about the 4th or 5th loan, I started saving everything intentionally. Every time she texted asking for help, I'd screenshot it and drop it into a folder on my phone labeled simply, M. I didn't really know why I was doing it. Maybe part of me was waiting for the moment I'd finally have the strength to confront her, and I needed the proof to hold myself steady. Or maybe I just couldn't bear the idea that, after all these years of being invisible, even my generosity would be forgotten. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers. Not my closest friend in Kansas City. It felt humiliating to admit I'd handed over so much money to someone who couldn't even bother to follow up with a real thank you, much less a payment plan. The last request came after a week of silence. She said they were at risk of missing a mortgage payment and needed to bridge the gap until Rick's next investment payout cleared. She asked for $1,200 this time. By then I had started to feel sick every time her name lit up on my phone. I didn't reply. And for 3 weeks after that she didn't follow up. "No, just checking in. No, sorry if I overwhelmed you." Nothing. And just like every other time before, she didn't pay back a single cent. The call came on a Thursday evening, just after I'd finished washing dishes and was getting ready to collapse into the couch with a blanket and some bad reality TV. Monica's name flashed on my screen, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel immediate dread. I just stared at the phone for a few seconds, wondering what version of her I was about to hear. The desperate, the cheerful, the polished performer, or the one who somehow managed to sound like all three at once. I answered on the 4th ring, bracing myself. He sounded calm, warm even. Her tone had that airy softness she used to put on for Christmas parties, the kind she thought sounded nurturing. "Haley," she said, stretching the syllables just slightly, like she was genuinely happy to hear my voice. "I've been thinking about you a lot." I didn't respond immediately, so she filled the silence. "I know things have been a little strained between us. I haven't been the best sister and I own that. But I want to change it. I really do." I sat down at the edge of the couch, holding the phone a little tighter. He kept going. There's this dinner happening next Saturday, she said. It's at the Grill at Temple. I don't know if you've heard of it, it's kind of a thing here. I managed to get a reservation and I've been saving it for something special. I thought, maybe this could be that. I had heard of the Grill at Temple. Even in Kansas City it was known. A sort of culinary mecca for the elite, hidden behind black-tinted windows and massive wrought iron doors. The kind of place where the menu has no prices because if you need to ask you probably shouldn't be there. Where every course arrives with some theatrical reveal, and the waitstaff wear tailored suits and gloves like they're serving royalty. It was pretentious, sure, but undeniably impressive. And she was inviting me there. What's the occasion? I asked cautiously. Monica exhaled into the phone, the sound oddly rehearsed. No occasion. That's the point. I just want to spend time with my sister. No pressure. No strings. Just the two of us. Like old times, kind of. That phrase, like old times, rang in my ears with a strange hollowness. What old times? The ones where she dressed me like her doll and paraded me in front of her friends before sending me back to my room, or the times when she pretended not to see me in the hallways at school, but I said none of that. I just sat there and listened. It would mean a lot to me, she added, her voice quieter now, as though she were holding back emotion. I know I've asked for too much lately. And I know I haven't really said thank you properly. But I'm trying to fix that. I wish I could say I had some great instinct that told me whether to trust her or not, but the truth is, I was tired. Tired of wondering if she even saw me as a real person. Tired of feeling used. Tired of always being the one who stood by quietly while she played the main character. And maybe, deep down, still hoping that one day she'd look at me and see someone she respected, not just someone she could call when the accounts dried up. So I said yes. The week leading up to the dinner was strange. Monica sent a couple of follow-up texts. Light, friendly, like we were two sisters who texted each other every day. One said, "So excited for Saturday. I've already picked out the wine." Another, "Wear something glam. You'll love this place. Feels like a movie." There was no mention of money. No sudden emergencies. Just anticipation. I spent longer than usual getting ready that evening. I chose a black dress with a high neckline and delicate sleeves. Something classic that made me feel quietly powerful, not flashy. I curled my hair, kept my makeup minimal but sharp, and slipped on a pair of black suede heels I hadn't worn since a wedding 2 years ago. Before leaving the house, I stared at myself in the mirror for a moment. I looked good. But more than that, I looked like someone who deserved to sit at the damn table. When I arrived at the Grill at Temple, I was greeted by a tall man in a black suit who asked for my name. When I gave it, he nodded once and motioned for me to follow. The place was everything I'd imagined. Dim lighting, soft music, architecture that felt more like a cathedral than a restaurant. As I was led through the dining room, I passed couples in evening wear, laughing over flutes of champagne, servers gliding between them with polished carts and silver domes. Monica was already seated at the table. She looked effortlessly stunning, of course, her hair in an elegant low bun, a crimson silk blouse tucked into high-waisted cream slacks. She stood when she saw me, arms open in a way that was almost theatrical. "You look beautiful," she said, leaning in for a hug. "I'm so glad you came." The table was set for two. Candles flickered in crystal holders, and the menus were printed on thick cardstock with no prices listed anywhere, just delicate descriptions of dishes I could barely pronounce. A server in white gloves poured us sparkling water and offered a selection of breads. Everything felt so curated, so clean. So intentional. We talked. Or rather, she talked and I nodded. She told me about a yoga certification retreat she was considering in Sedona, about Rick looking into some new ventures. She asked a little about my work but not enough to be interested. I answered but briefly. Mostly I watched her. She was so comfortable. So completely in her element. At one point she reached across the table, took my hand and said, "I really do want us to be close again. I mean it this time." I didn't know what to say. There were too many layers. Too many years of history, of imbalance. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak without tipping into something I'd regret. After dinner, when the check was discreetly delivered in a black leather folder, she reached for it without hesitation. A small, performative move. But still, it was the first time she'd ever done that. As we walked out into the cool night air, she looped her arm through mine and said, "Let's do this again soon. Just us." I smiled, but there was a pressure in my chest that wouldn't ease. Something about the whole night felt like a setup I hadn't understood yet. I arrived right on time, maybe a minute or two early, because part of me still wanted to believe that this dinner was what she said it would be. Something honest, something about us. I'd even let myself feel hopeful. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to our last dinner, touched up my makeup in the car before stepping out, and stood for a second outside the Grill at Temple just to breathe. The valet took the car smoothly, and the same host from last time greeted me by name. Everything felt familiar, elegant, almost comforting in a strange way. But then I stepped into the dining area and everything changed. There were already 6 people at the table. I recognized none of them. 4 women and 2 men, all dressed in that Scottsdale uniform kind of wealth. Silk, linen, designer shoes that whispered rather than shouted. They were laughing when I walked in, one of the women mid-story with her hands gesturing above a half-empty glass of something deep red. Monica was sitting near the center, in a gold dress with structured shoulders and a deep neckline, her hair in polished waves. She looked up, saw me and waved. Not stood up. Not came over. Just waved. I hesitated, waiting for her to acknowledge the obvious, that there were no empty seats at the table. But she didn't. The server beside her, dressed in the usual white gloves and dark vest, gestured to a single chair that had been placed beside a structural column about 3 feet behind the main group. It wasn't even at the same table. It was closer to where the servers stood waiting between courses. A small round bistro chair without arms, no place setting, no wine glass, just a cloth napkin folded awkwardly on the edge. I felt the heat rise up the back of my neck. The others barely looked in my direction. One of the women gave a polite half-smile, the kind you give when a stranger steps into a private space and you're not sure whether to acknowledge them or not. I walked over slowly, trying to make eye contact with Monica, hoping, honestly hoping, that she'd see my confusion, my discomfort and say something like, "Oh God, that's a mistake, come sit here, we'll make room." But nothing came. She just smiled and turned back to the conversation as if I hadn't walked in at all. I sat down at the chair by the column. No one spoke to me. The angle of the setup made it so I could see only half of the table, and they had to physically turn if they wanted to include me. No one did. A server approached and quietly slid a menu in front of me, the same custom menu without prices, each dish described with theatrical elegance. Aged ribeye with black truffle butter, lobster poached in saffron cream, heirloom vegetables with edible flowers. I didn't even open it. My throat was dry, my stomach already turning. When the wine arrived, an obscenely expensive red, poured from a crystal decanter, the glasses went around the main table only. No one offered to include me. I asked for sparkling water and the server poured it into a short glass, no lemon, no ceremony. When it came time to order, everyone at the main table selected without hesitation. Steaks, caviar, lobster towers. One woman asked, without irony, whether the oysters were flown in that day or the day before. When the server got to me, I ordered a salad. My voice felt thin. The arugula and pear, please. He nodded, almost with sympathy, and left. I could feel them looking. Not everyone, but enough. Like they were trying to figure out if I was there by mistake or part of some social experiment Monica was conducting. At one point, one of the men leaned over to Monica and said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed, loudly, sharply, then glanced over her shoulder at me. Not with malice. Just amusement. Later in the evening, after their 3rd bottle of wine, when Monica was recounting some story about a yoga retreat that ended with her locking herself out of her suite and wandering barefoot in the sacred canyon, someone asked if I'd ever been. Monica answered for me. Haley, God no, she's more practical. She's the salad type. I got a few laughs. Not cruel ones. The light, effortless laughter of people who've never been excluded, never had to measure their worth in silence. I laughed too, quietly, because what else was I supposed to do? I picked at my salad while they devoured course after course. At one point, the scent of grilled buttered seafood and the rich perfume of red meat made my stomach churn, not with hunger but with shame. Like I was 15 again, standing outside Monica's room during one of her high school sleepovers, listening through the door as she laughed with her friends about how weird I was, how boring. Only now it was grown up with wine and white gloves. When the dessert came, it was served to the main table only. A sampler tray of miniature creme brulees, dark chocolate tarts and something topped with spun sugar. I wasn't even asked. No one said goodbye to me when the evening ended. Monica air kissed the women, hugged the men, took pictures with someone's phone. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping faintly against the marble floor. Monica turned as I walked past, her expression unreadable. Thanks for coming, she said lightly, like I'd dropped by her office on a coffee run. I didn't respond. I walked past the host stand, out the double doors and into the night. The valet asked for my ticket, but I just kept walking for a while down the block, heels clicking on the sidewalk, breath sharp in my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to feel like I was moving away from her. The check arrived with a kind of quiet ceremony, tucked inside a leather folder, placed gently on the center of the table by a white-gloved server who bowed slightly before stepping away. Everyone was laughing, their voices a little louder now after several bottles of wine, the kind of laughter that came easily when no one in the room had to worry about rent or car payments. The table had become a mess of empty glasses, butter-slicked plates, half-melted desserts, and napkins folded carelessly beside untouched bites of foie gras. I sat motionless, still perched in that ridiculous chair near the column, watching as Monica reached for the folder with a flourish. She opened it with both hands and for a moment the laughter paused. I saw her eyes flick to the total and then back to the group. She smiled like she was about to deliver a punchline. $1,900, she said, raising her eyebrows and holding up the check. Now that's what I call a celebration. The others let out a collective murmur, impressed, not concerned. One of the men chuckled and said something like, "Worth every penny," while another woman clapped her hands softly as if this were all part of a game. But then Monica's gaze shifted. Straight to me. "You've been so generous lately," she said, tilting her head slightly, her tone still airy but with that unmistakable edge I knew too well. "Maybe you could cover this one, for old time's sake." The table went quiet. Not dramatically but subtly. Forks stopped moving. Wine glasses were set down. And every eye turned toward me. This woman who had sat silently all night, excluded, ignored, made into a prop. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. That surprised me. Instead, I sat back in my chair and looked at her for a long, quiet second. I watched the way her lips curled, how her fingers hovered just above the check like she was already sure I'd reach for it. There was no question in her eyes, only expectation. She genuinely believed I would say yes. That I would do what I'd always done. That I would step into the role of the helper, the filler, the sister who keeps things smooth and pleasant no matter the cost. But I didn't move. I didn't apologize. I didn't make an excuse. I didn't look around the table for support or try to justify myself. I just said, "That's not my problem." My voice was quiet but sharp. I didn't need to raise it. Monica blinked, her smile faltering for the first time all night. A couple of the guests shifted in their seats, suddenly very interested in their napkins or the flickering candlelight. One of the women gave a small, awkward laugh like she thought I was joking. But I wasn't. I stood up. Smoothed the front of my dress. I didn't say another word. I didn't glance at the check or the stunned expression Monica was now trying to control. I just picked up my coat from the back of the empty chair, turned and walked away from the table. The room was silent behind me. I could hear the soft chime of cutlery in the distance, the hum of quiet conversation at other tables, the heavy hush of the space I was finally stepping out of. No one followed me. No one called my name. And I didn't look back. The calls started before I even reached my hotel. My phone buzzed violently in my coat pocket so often it felt like a second pulse. I ignored the first one, then the second. By the time I got into the elevator, the screen read 5 missed calls from Monica. I slid the phone into airplane mode without checking the voicemail. When I turned it back on an hour later, there were 19 missed calls. 15 from Monica. 4 from Rick. Texts flooded in like a burst pipe, long, disjointed messages from Monica that shifted between outrage and self-pity. The first one read, "What the hell was that?" The next, "You embarrassed me in front of my friends." Then within minutes, "I literally cannot believe how selfish you are." Followed by, "Everything I've done for you and this is how you repay me." Rick's tone was worse. Harsher. Less emotional, more cruel in its efficiency. "You humiliated Monica. After everything she's been through, you walk out on her, then, you've always been jealous and it's disgusting." Another one several hours later said, "We trusted you. Family doesn't do this." By midnight the text took on a different flavor. Monica wrote, "I guess you're not even going to respond, so much for being sisters. Then, you've changed. Not in a good way." And finally, "Don't bother coming around again. You made your choice." I didn't answer any of them. I lay on the bed with the phone on the nightstand, screen dimmed, vibrations still buzzing every 10 minutes with new notifications. I read every word, but it felt like watching someone else's drama unfold from a distance I had earned the right to have. I felt strangely calm. There was no guilt. Just a quiet, heavy relief, like the end of a storm I didn't realize I'd been walking through for years. The next day it escalated. At 9:06 in the morning I got a call from my mother. I didn't answer the first time. Or the second. But on the third attempt I picked up, already bracing myself. Her voice was clipped tight with disapproval. Not loud but pointed, which was always worse. "Haley," she said, "what happened last night?" I didn't answer right away. She sighed sharply into the phone. "Monica called me in tears. She said you left the restaurant in the middle of dinner, refused to help with the bill, humiliated her." I let the silence hang for a second longer, then said, "That's more or less accurate." She scoffed. "Why would you do that? That's not like you." I bit down on the inside of my cheek, trying to stay calm. "Maybe this is what I'm like now." "You don't mean that," she said. "Monica is your sister. She's always had a bigger personality, yes, but that doesn't mean you get to walk away from her like that." "She humiliated me," I said finally. She sat me away from the table, made jokes about me, and then asked me to pay for a $2,000 dinner I wasn't part of. She said it was a celebration. Maybe she was just trying to include you, maybe not in the best way, but you should have handled it differently. You always were the more mature one. There was that same familiar expectation, that I should be the one to smooth things over, to bend, to absorb. The responsible one. The rational one. The silent one. Being the mature one doesn't mean letting people treat me like furniture, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I just think you could have been kinder. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead I said, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-erasure. She didn't respond to that. She just sighed again, then mumbled something about needing to call Monica back and hung up. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring out at the sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt what it meant to not need their approval. Not hers. Not Monica's. Not Rick's. I had spent years trying to earn a place at a table that was never built to include me. Now I wasn't asking anymore. I blocked Monica's number. Then Rick's. I didn't delete the messages. I kept them. Every screenshot, every voice note, every desperate, cruel, manipulative word. As a quiet ledger of the moment I stopped letting someone else write my story. And I didn't return another call. I agreed to meet her because I wanted it to be over properly. I didn't want another screaming voicemail, another message wrapped in fake warmth, another lie dressed like vulnerability. I wanted to look her in the eye, give her the chance to say what she clearly hadn't been able to say through the flood of manipulation and anger. But mostly, I wanted her to know I wasn't afraid of her anymore. We met at a corner cafe near downtown Scottsdale, one of those neutral modern places with reclaimed wood tables, white ceramic cups, and the kind of clientele who work from laptops without ever seeming to type. It was a weekday morning just after 10, and the cafe was quiet except for the sound of milk frothing and spoons tapping against porcelain. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window with sunglasses perched on her head and her phone face down beside an untouched latte. She stood when she saw me, gave a forced smile and opened her arms like she wanted a hug. I didn't move. She let her hands drop and sat back down slowly. I took the seat across from her and folded my hands in my lap. Thanks for coming, she said, voice low, softer than I'd expected. She looked different. Tired. Less polished. There were no gold bracelets, no fresh blowout, no glowing skin routine. Just a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. I said nothing. Just waited. She stared out the window for a second before speaking again. I'm sorry for how everything went. At the dinner. That wasn't fair. It wasn't supposed to go like that. It went exactly how you planned, I said flatly. Let's not pretend. She nodded, eyes blinking a little too fast, like she was rehearsing the tears before they came. You're right, she said. You're completely right. I've been awful. And I've used you. I know that. But I didn't know how else to. I didn't think it would all fall apart so fast. I didn't ask what she meant. I let her keep talking. We're broke, Haley, she said finally. Not just tight on money broke. Like, Rick maxed out every line of credit we had. The house is months behind on payments. The car got repossessed last week. Half the stuff we posted online, it's not even ours. We borrowed. We rented. We thought we could grow the business before the debts caught up. She took a shaky breath and added, we're probably going to lose everything. There it was, the truth she'd never let anyone else see. The picture-perfect world she'd curated for years was a facade made of borrowed things and unpaid bills. And yet, as she spoke, I kept waiting for the part where she'd say the thing that mattered. The part where she'd say she was sorry. That she understood what she'd done to me. That she regretted it. But it never came. Instead, she leaned forward, elbows on the table, palms open like a confession. We didn't mean to use you. We just didn't have any other options. We thought things would turn around. Rick kept saying the next deal would hit and I believed him. We didn't think we'd have to ask again and then. We did. And then again. And you kept helping so. So it was my fault, I interrupted. No, not your fault. I'm just saying. I didn't think you'd say yes if you couldn't. I stared at her for a long time, studying her face. The slight twitch in her jaw, the way her eyes darted between mine and the table. It was all excuses. Justifications. Defense. She wasn't sorry. She was cornered. You owe me $4,300, I said. And I want it back. She sat back like I'd slapped her. We don't have it, she said quietly. You know that. Then you have 2 weeks to figure it out, I said. Liquidate something. Ask your friends. Sell whatever fake designer bags you're posting about. I don't care. She was silent. I reached into my bag, pulled out a plain envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was a typed letter. A formal demand for repayment. With dates. With documentation. With my lawyer's name at the bottom. If I don't see the full amount by the end of the second week, I file this in court. Her face hardened. The shift was instant. The watery expression vanished. Her mouth tightened. You're going to sue your own sister. I didn't flinch. You stopped being my sister when you made me a target. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. For the first time in my life, Monica didn't have anything left to say. I stood up, picked up my coat and walked out. And this time she didn't follow me. Monica never paid. The 2 weeks passed without a single message, no attempt to explain, no apology, and definitely no money. I waited until the final day, watching my inbox, expecting some last-minute attempt at negotiation or maybe another manipulative plea. But there was nothing. Just silence, like she believed I was bluffing. Like everything she'd done could be smoothed over if she ignored it long enough. So I filed the lawsuit. My attorney, Melissa, was calm and surgical in her approach. She had reviewed every screenshot, every bank transfer, every text message that mentioned the word loan, repay, or borrow. The folder I'd kept on my phone, labeled simply M, became the foundation of our case. Within a few days we filed a small claims complaint for the full $4,300, plus interest and court costs. Monica was served while at home, according to the process server's report. I pictured her opening the envelope in that over-decorated living room, surrounded by unpaid-for furniture, staring down at something that finally had consequences. She didn't show up to the initial hearing. Melissa pushed for a default judgment and the judge agreed. The decision came in just under a week: full repayment of the $4,300, plus $210 in interest, and $385 for court filing fees and legal processing. In black and white, stamped and official, it was the first time someone had ever told Monica no and made it stick. But what I hadn't expected, what none of us expected, was what came next. 2 days after the judgment was finalized, I got a message on Instagram from someone named Ashley. I didn't recognize the name at first, but the profile picture was of a woman who looked familiar in that Scottsdale kind of way. Impeccable makeup, sleek hair, standing in front of a pool. Her message was short: "Hi, I think we should talk. It's about Monica and Rick." I ignored it at first, unsure if it was some kind of setup. But then she messaged again with more detail. "I used to date Rick. I think you're not the only one they scammed." I called Melissa and we agreed to meet with Ashley in person at her office. Ashley was calm but clearly holding back years of frustration. She told me she had dated Rick a few years before he met Monica. At the time, he had pitched her on a private investment opportunity related to his so-called startup, something in software consulting for real estate firms. She'd invested $7,000. He told her she'd double it in under a year. When nothing came back, he disappeared. "I didn't report it then," she admitted. "I felt stupid. I thought I was the only one. But seeing your case, it gave me the push." That meeting opened a floodgate. Ashley posted discreetly about it on her private account, and within 48 hours, 2 more women reached out to her. Both had similar stories. One had given Monica $3,000 as a business loan to help her open a wellness studio that never existed. Another had been convinced to co-sign on a luxury lease Monica promised to take over entirely, only to be left with months of unpaid bills and a collection agency on her back. With their permission, I compiled everything: names, documentation, copies of messages and transfers, even a PDF Monica had once sent with a mock business plan that used stock images and completely fabricated numbers. Ashley helped coordinate, staying in touch with each of them, keeping the lines open and organized. We brought it all to the Scottsdale Police Department. Melissa helped us file a formal report, attaching the civil judgment, statements from the other women, and a timeline that made it clear this wasn't just bad behavior. It was a pattern. A manipulative scheme that Monica and Rick had been running for years, dressing it up in social media glitz and spiritual-sounding buzzwords. They weren't just bad with money. They were predators using charm and proximity to extract whatever they could from people too polite, or too ashamed, to stop them. The detective who took our report didn't promise anything immediately, but he listened carefully. He asked real questions. He didn't roll his eyes or suggest it was a family issue. He said, "It sounds like we're looking at potential fraud, maybe more, depending on what else we find." When we walked out of that precinct, I felt lighter than I had in months. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. About giving a name to the thing that had made me feel small for so long. About refusing to let someone like Monica rewrite the story again with crocodile tears and curated photo ops. She thought her world was made of gold. But all she'd ever built was a house of cards. And now, finally, it was starting to fall. It took almost 6 months of waiting, emails, phone calls, and long meetings with detectives and prosecutors before anything official happened. At times I caught myself wondering if maybe they'd just walk away again, slick and untouched like they always had. Monica had built her entire life on getting away with things, and Rick was the perfect mirror to that confident, unbothered, untouchable. But then one cold morning in March I got the email. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office had formally filed criminal charges. Fraud. Multiple counts. Both Monica and Rick were named. My breath caught in my chest when I read the line. The state has sufficient cause to prosecute based on documented financial misrepresentation, coercion, and the intentional defrauding of multiple individuals over an extended period. I remember just sitting there in my kitchen staring at the words on my laptop screen, holding my mug of coffee that had gone completely cold in my hands. It felt surreal. Not joyful, not vindictive, just real. For the first time, something in the world finally matched what I'd known in my gut for years. The trial was scheduled for early June. It wasn't televised, of course, but I sat through every day I was allowed to attend, sometimes next to Ashley, sometimes beside one of the other women, each of us holding a different part of the same broken story. The prosecution presented everything. Bank statements, transaction histories, screenshots of Monica's messages asking for money with tearful emojis and promises to pay back by Friday, voice memos where Rick pitched fake investment opportunities in his smooth, confident tone, emails with altered business proposals, complete with fake EINs and photoshopped invoices. They even brought in an expert witness, a forensic accountant, who walked the jury through how Monica and Rick had cycled money from person to person, moving just enough to create the illusion of repayment while always staying in the red. Watching Monica on the stand was like watching a person unravel in real time. She still tried to play the role. The victim, the misunderstood woman trying to hold things together. Her voice trembled, her hands shook just enough to seem authentic. But the jury wasn't moved. Not when the DA read out her own words asking for just $500 more, just one more favor, and then paired those messages with Instagram posts of designer handbags, champagne brunches and sunset gratitude selfies. Rick was colder. He didn't fake tears. He smirked, shrugged, tried to explain things away like none of it had been that serious. His defense tried to argue that these were personal misunderstandings, that no one had been forced, that verbal agreements between family and friends weren't enforceable in the same way. But the prosecution dismantled that argument piece by piece. They had too much. Too many names. Too many timelines. Too much proof. The jury took just over 4 hours to come back with a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Monica was sentenced to 18 months. Rick got 15. Both were convicted of multiple counts of fraud, financial coercion, and wire fraud related to misuse of digital platforms for deceptive financial solicitation. The judge also ordered full restitution to every named victim, just over $46,000 total. My name was on that list. I watched them both as the sentence was read. Monica's expression was frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line like she was physically trying not to scream. Rick didn't look at anyone. Just stared down at the table like none of it mattered. As they were led out of the courtroom, Monica turned once and looked at me. Her eyes were blank. No apology, no anger, no sadness. Just silence. Like even now she still couldn't understand how someone like me had the power to bring her down. But I did. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I had finally stopped pretending it didn't matter. Because people like Monica and Rick count on silence. On politeness. On shame. And for years I had given them exactly what they needed. Not anymore. That part of my life, the part where I let myself be smaller, quieter, easier so someone else could shine, is over. I walked out of the courthouse into the Arizona sun and didn't look back. In the weeks after the sentencing, everything slowed down in a way that felt foreign at first. There were no late-night calls to dread, no endless mental rehearsals of what I should have said, no quiet resentment hanging over my mornings. Just stillness. It was strange to realize how long I had lived under a low-grade pressure, the constant tension of keeping the peace with people who only showed up when they needed something. With Monica and Rick no longer in my orbit, the silence felt like a relief I hadn't known I needed. I moved out of my old apartment not long after. It wasn't a dramatic escape. I just packed up the last few boxes of books, cleaned the baseboards and left the keys on the counter one final time. My new place was smaller but brighter. A third-floor walk-up with creaky wood floors, huge windows, and a tiny balcony where I could drink coffee in the morning and not feel watched. It felt like mine from the moment I stepped inside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was temporarily renting a life. Work changed too. My manager called me into her office one Friday afternoon and told me they were expanding our department, and she wanted me to take the lead on a new program for post-operative athletes. Came with a raise, a new title, and more control over my schedule. She said she'd seen how I'd handled everything over the past year. Calm, focused, professional. I smiled, said thank you and excused myself before she could say more. I sat in my car for 20 minutes afterward, staring at the dashboard, trying to process that someone finally saw me as reliable, not because I absorbed other people's chaos, but because I built something steady on my own. Around that time I also met Logan. He was introduced to me by a friend from the clinic, who insisted we'd get along. I rolled my eyes at first, assuming it was another well-meaning setup, but then he showed up to meet us for lunch, hair a little messy from wind, a smudge of dirt still on the sleeve of his button-up. He was a landscape designer, quiet, observant, but easy to talk to in a way that didn't drain me. He asked questions and actually listened. He didn't flinch when I talked about what had happened, didn't try to fix it, didn't even offer advice. He just nodded and said, "That sounds like hell. I'm glad you made it through." We started spending more time together. Hikes on weekends, movie nights on his couch, long drives out of the city just to talk and sit in quiet places. There was no pressure, no constant demand to explain or perform. I didn't have to earn his attention. I could just be. My relationship with my family, on the other hand, collapsed completely. After the trial, my mother called once, just once. She left a voicemail, her voice thick with disappointment. She didn't mention the fraud, the lies, or the money Monica had stolen. She only said, "You've split this family in half. I hope it was worth it." I didn't call back. Neither did she. I didn't hear from most of them again. The cousins I grew up with stayed quiet. A few aunts sent stiff emails with no real warmth. For a while I grieved that part. Not the people themselves, but the idea of what I thought family was supposed to be. The unconditional closeness. The support. The loyalty. But slowly other people stepped in. Colleagues I'd barely spoken to started inviting me for drinks after work, and I found myself laughing more easily than I had in years. Friends I'd always considered casual turned out to be quietly loyal, showing up with groceries when I moved, texting me when the weather turned cold just to say, "You okay?" And then there were the people I hadn't expected at all. Relatives from my dad's side, cousins I barely knew growing up. One of them, Erin, reached out through social media after hearing about the trial. She said, "You didn't deserve any of that. Good for you." That one message opened a door, and suddenly there was a thread of connection I hadn't known I was allowed to have. We started talking more. Sharing family stories, pictures, memories that didn't involve Monica. When I visited them in Missouri later that year, it felt like stepping into a version of my history that had never been poisoned. They didn't need me to be anything but honest. It felt like the first time I'd been part of something without having to prove I belonged. Life isn't perfect now. Some mornings I still wake up with that old, reflexive anxiety, the kind that tells me I must have forgotten something or that someone's waiting to guilt trip me. But then I walk onto my little balcony, sip my coffee, and realize the air is still quiet. I didn't just survive them. I built something after them. And it's mine. It had been 6 months since the sentencing when I got the message from Ashley. We hadn't spoken much since the trial ended. Life had gone on. She'd started a new job in Flagstaff and I'd been busy with the new clinic program and honestly just trying to live like a person again, without chaos trailing behind every phone call. So when her name lit up on my phone, I paused before opening the message, thinking it might be just a check-in, a memory, maybe even an update on how she was doing. But it wasn't that. "She's at it again," the message read. Different city. Different name on social media. But same tactics. There was a screenshot attached, Monica or someone calling themselves Mona Lee, standing in front of a pastel wall covered in ivy, arms open like a lifestyle guru, captioned with a quote about healing, abundance, and how when you move in truth, money follows. I felt a weight settle in my chest, not from shock but from confirmation. She had always treated consequences like temporary inconveniences, like something she could charm her way around once the dust settled. Ashley had heard from a friend, a woman in Phoenix, who had been approached by someone calling herself Mona, offering spiritual business mentoring and private access to an exclusive women's empowerment circle that required an upfront fee. The language was identical to Monica's old pitch. The vibe was the same too, just a little more polished, a little more careful. I didn't hesitate this time. I told Ashley I'd help however I could. We arranged a call that evening, and for an hour we went over the message history her friend had shared, compared timelines, names, even phrases Monica had reused without realizing how easy she was to trace. We pulled up the court documents, the mugshot records, and the fraud report that was still public record. This time I wasn't scared. I wasn't uncertain. I was ready. Ashley thanked me more than once, but I told her honestly, I didn't see it as a favor. I saw it as a duty. Because I knew how long it could take to come back from someone like Monica. How deep her kind of manipulation could cut. I knew what it felt like to blame yourself for trusting someone who never earned that trust in the first place. And I knew exactly how hard it was to stand up and say, "This happened and I won't let it happen again." We submitted a formal complaint with the State Fraud Division, this time attaching the old court documents to show history, intent, and pattern. Within a few weeks, they launched a preliminary investigation. Whether charges will follow again, I don't know. But I do know that the truth has a way of catching up even with the most skilled liars. Monica used to talk a lot about energy, about alignment, about what you put out into the universe comes back to you. She used it as a costume, a way to deflect real accountability behind vague spiritualisms and Instagram-worthy quotes. But ironically, she was right, what you put out does come back. Eventually. I've learned that the deepest kind of justice isn't always about the courtroom or the check in the mail, or even the apology you never get. Sometimes it's simply the quiet, grounded certainty that you no longer owe anyone your silence. Monica once tried to define me by her shadow. Now when people hear my story, they don't ask me about her. They ask me how I stayed strong. How I rebuilt. How I walked away and never looked back. And that's what stuck. Not her lies. Not her image. But my refusal to be buried by them. This isn't just the end of the story. It's the proof that I get to write every chapter that comes next. On my terms. In my name. And this time no one else holds the pen.